According to your deposition before this committee, it sounds like your problem was not determining if you had enough evidence to charge Donald Trump, but rather that you might have had too much evidence and struggled to determine how to present a clear narrative to a jury.
Representative Jerry Nadler directly addresses years of personal and political attacks against Special Counsel Jack Smith, giving Smith the opportunity to explain how his career, decisions, and prosecutions have always been guided by facts and law, not politics.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, over the past few years, Republicans have waged constant attacks on you. Donald Trump has said you are totally compromised, a political hitman, a left-wing radical, a criminal, a fully weaponized monster, and that you should be considered mentally deranged and thrown out of the country. Just this week, he called you a sick bastard. Unfortunately, the rules of decorum prevent me from saying what I think of Donald Trump. But he is not the only one to launch attacks against you. Chairman Jordan has accused you of abusive surveillance and accused you and your team of partisan and politically motivated prosecutions. Despite the mountain of evidence that you laid out in the special counsel's report and in your court filings, President Trump's supporters are convinced that the only reason your team tried to hold him accountable is because you have a vendetta against him. I want to address these allegations today. You have had a long and distinguished career with the Justice Department, including serving as the chief of DOJ's Public Integrity Section for 5 years. While leading the Public Integrity Section, you led investigations and prosecution of public figures and political leaders from both parties, Republicans and Democrats. Can you give us a couple of examples?
Sorry about that. During my time as the chief of public integrity, I investigated cases involving both Republicans and Democrats. The standard in all of those cases was the same: follow the facts and the law. Didn't matter what party you in, it mattered the facts of the case. In doing that, there were cases I brought against Democrats and cases I brought against Republicans. There were also cases that I investigated and did not bring against Democrats and Republicans. Party affiliation played no role in my investigations. I can think of multiple cases of prominent members of Congress that we investigated who were Republicans, who upon reviewing the law and the facts, I decided not to go forward in those cases. And the same could be said with people on the Democratic side. I've always tried to follow the facts and the law in my career.
When it comes to deciding whether to pursue a criminal prosecution of an individual, what factors do you consider?
The primary factors are the facts and the law. As a federal prosecutor, in making a prosecutorial decision, you're guided by the federal principles of prosecution, which guide one not only to look at the facts and the law, but the federal interests. And that is exactly what we did in this case, as set forth in my final report.
Does partisan politics play a role in your decision whether or not to prosecute someone?
None.
To be clear, did partisan politics play a role in your decision to charge Donald Trump?
It did not.
What does it do to the justice system if political leaders place pressure on prosecutors to file charges against their political enemies? What are the implications if prosecution decisions are based on politics, not the law?
I think it weakens the rule of law in our country because it weakens the mechanism for us to prosecute, among other things, corruption. When there is political prosecutions targeting people because they're enemies of the president, the department loses credibility and it can't do its job in all sorts of cases.
According to your deposition before this committee, it sounds like your problem was not determining if you had enough evidence to charge Donald Trump, but rather that you might have had too much evidence and struggled to determine how to present a clear narrative to a jury. How would you characterize the evidence against Mr. Trump about inciting an insurrection against the laws of this country? Did you have too much?
Well, with respect to presenting the case that we charged, one of the central challenges was trying to present that in a concise way because we did have so many witnesses. Some of the most powerful witnesses were witnesses who, in fact, were fellow Republicans who had voted for Donald Trump, who had campaigned for him, and who wanted him to win the election. These included state officials, people who worked on his campaign, and advisors. I will say, however, with respect to the charge of insurrection, we did not charge that. As I set forth in my report, well, I believe that courts have found that that was an insurrection and that there's a reasonable interpretation, a reasonable prosecutor could interpret the evidence to support that charge. I chose not to do that, looking at the facts in the law. I thought the charges we brought were appropriate given the evidence that we had.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for your decades-long public service and for working tirelessly to uphold the rule of law. Those who attack and smear you and your team in order to protect Donald Trump should be ashamed of themselves. I yield back.
What this exchange reveals is not just a defense of one prosecutor, but a defense of the very idea that law in a democratic society must stand apart from raw political power. The questioning makes clear that the attacks directed at Mr. Smith were never really about evidence, procedure, or legal standards. They were about delegitimizing accountability itself. When political figures repeatedly describe prosecutors as monsters, radicals, or enemies of the state, the goal is not debate. It is intimidation and erosion of public trust. Mr. Smith's testimony cuts through that noise with something strikingly simple: consistency. Over decades of public service, the same standard applied again and again. Facts first, law first, party never. That principle sounds obvious, but in the current climate it has become controversial, simply because it resists loyalty tests. The idea that a prosecutor can investigate members of both parties, decline cases against both parties, and charge members of both parties based on the same criteria directly contradicts the narrative that justice has been turned into a partisan weapon. What stands out most is how calmly this point is reinforced. There is no defensiveness, no rhetorical escalation, no attempt to settle political scores. Instead, there is a methodical explanation of how prosecutorial decisions are actually made, examining evidence, applying statutes, considering federal interests, and weighing whether a case can be responsibly presented to a jury. This is not the language of vendetta. It is the language of institutional restraint. The discussion about evidence is particularly revealing. The challenge was not whether there was enough information to justify charges, but how to organize a vast record into a coherent story. That detail matters because it directly undermines claims of reckless or politically motivated prosecution. A case built on dozens of witnesses, including individuals who supported and worked for the accused, does not resemble a partisan hit job. It resembles an investigation that followed where the evidence led, even when that evidence came from within the same political camp. Equally important is what was not charged. The decision not to pursue certain counts, despite public debate and legal theories suggesting they were possible, demonstrates discretion rather than aggression. Prosecutorial power is strongest when it is limited by judgment, and that restraint is on full display here. Choosing narrower charges aligned with provable facts reflects respect for due process, not fear or favoritism. The broader warning offered during this exchange should not be ignored. When leaders pressure prosecutors to target enemies or shield allies, the damage extends far beyond any single case. It weakens the ability of institutions to address corruption, undermines confidence in verdicts, and teaches the public that justice is just another political tool. Once that belief takes hold, no outcome is trusted, and no rule is stable. This moment, then, is less about defending one individual and more about defending a boundary between law and politics, between evidence and rhetoric, between accountability and impunity. The testimony reinforces that prosecutors do not serve presidents, parties, or movements. They serve the law. Attacking that principle may offer short-term political gain, but it comes at the cost of something far more valuable: a justice system that functions even when the most powerful people are involved. That is the real issue at stake, and it is why this exchange matters far beyond the hearing room.